our last presentation today, I just want to give thanks and back up just 1 minute to acknowledge where we're at. You know, we take off in our presentations and in our day, and as Native people, you know, we give thanks, and when we give thanks to the land. We give thanks to where we're from. So I want to acknowledge that, and I want to invite everybody to kind of reflect on where we're at and how we got here, and the people who were important, you know, the Native people that were important to get this process started to where we're at, and to feel the kind of freedoms and the luxuries that we have today, you know, began thousands of years ago. So just reflecting on that place and time is a good thing to do, and it helps center us. And we'll get started with our last presentation, Tanaya Winder. She's a poet, writer. She's a multidisciplinary artist, and she's an educator.
My name is Tanaya Winder. I'm a citizen of the Duckwater Shoshone Nation, and I currently live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm a motivational speaker, a poet, spoken word poet, and I also do music, singer, songwriter, acoustic stuff. What I'm really excited about with this event is just the whole idea of self-care and community care. I think oftentimes when we talk about Indigenous Peoples Day, we just talk about the history, and that's so important, and that's something we do need to be educating people about. I'm grateful for all the people out there who do that education, but I think that's with the outward facing thing, like this is for other people to learn about who we are. But if it's actually our day, you know, how are we taking care of ourselves? How are we remaining connected to those we care about? How are we learning to just do that self-love and make sure that we're alive to continue making change and to continue staying here? I would say it's self-care, just even reflecting on self-care. You know, how are you going to share this with other people? How do you take care of yourself? And it's just confronting yourself with honesty too. You know, like nobody is perfect at self-care. We all have so many different things and commitments and responsibilities we juggle. And so you have to make time for self-care. Like in the same way you make time to prepare for a talk, it's like how you prepare for a meal. Like you take time to find the ingredients, you put that love and that energy into it. And I think, you know, that's what I try to do whenever I'm able to bring myself to events like this, where I get to share a little bit of my story and hopefully a little advice that resonates with people. I think just continuing to destigmatize self-care. You know, I think when we grow up being connected to our communities, we always have a role or responsibility to our nations, to our families. Everybody has a role. And sometimes it can still be like seen as selfish to do self-care, to take care of yourself. But you can't do the work if you're dead. You know, you have to take care of yourself. Like you have to be there to make sure like we all win together. And that means like taking time to have breakfast, or taking time to drink water, or taking time away from the screen, or taking time to reconnect with the earth. And I hope that this series just reminds people of what it means to be human, and hearing just different perspectives, that anybody already has the tools they need to take care of themselves and to heal themselves. I'm just so excited to be able to be here in person after doing so many talks through the computer screen. And I just miss that energy, being around other people. I'm excited to hear from my sisters today, to hear what knowledge they have, and just to rekindle each other's fire. Ooh, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for sticking with us. I know I've heard so many awesome things so far. So I'm kind of chilly in here. I don't know if you all are, but let's start by just rubbing our hands together real fast. Let's get some heat going, warm it up a little bit. And just do some deep breathing while you're doing that. Breathe in the good, breathe in the light. And then exhale all the stuff you want to let go of. And then go ahead and stop for a second. You feel that little tingling, that energy that we all just created. Then put one hand on your heart and one on your belly, and just breathe in, and let's send some of that good energy to the parts of our bodies that might need healing. Let's send it to some of our relatives who might need healing, who might have a hard time breathing physically or mentally, and send them some of our love. And I wanted to just start in that way because for me, somebody who also struggles with mental health sometimes, I think it's helpful to just do that exercise sometime. One, it warms you up if you're cold, but also like that tingling that we felt, like to remember that you can create energy. You as a human being, you and your vessel, you can create energy. You felt it. We felt the tingling after you rubbed your hands, but you can do that in your life too. And so today I'm going to talk about the healing of heart work. And I call it heart work because I feel like heart work is one of the things that we spend our entire lives doing. It's your passion, it's your purpose, and it's hard work because healing is hard work. They say that the longest distance is the 18 inches between your head and your heart because we just have so much conflict, right? Between what we're thinking in our head, what we're feeling in our heart, and trying to reconcile those, trying to make them speak to each other. And learning to heal, it is hard work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to find your heart work, how to embrace your heart work, and how that I feel like is tied to our healing. And so when we try to connect those things, your head and your heart, maybe trying to just connect your life, to parts that matter. Maybe you're in a job that doesn't make you feel worthy. Maybe you're with a partner who doesn't make you feel worthy. How do you connect to those parts of yourself that know your values, that know the places that you need to heal? And so how do we connect? I call it a creator-shaped hole because each of us has gone through trauma. Nobody lives a life unscathed. Nobody lives a life without pain or hurts or woundings, whether it's ancestral trauma and those soul wounds, whether it's our community, our nations, whether it's our family or things that we've gone through as an individual. And for me, I call that the creator-shaped hole. Maybe for you, it's a God-shaped hole. Maybe it's a spirit, a greater power-shaped hole. But every time something has happened traumatically to me, I feel like that hole has just increased a little bit in size. And I used to try to do unhealthy things to fill that hole. I tried binge drinking when I was younger, some of those things that Amber talked about, just making unhealthy choices, like trying to do anything just to not feel that. But you have to feel it to heal it. And so when I started thinking about that creator-shaped hole more, I thought, well, that's where, for me, my art comes from. That's where I poem from. That's where I write music from. That's why I do my youth work or connect to other people. I heard once from one of my creative writing professors, she said, the source of the hurt is also the source of the healing. And she was actually talking about a tree. I think it was in South America, where if you get cut by that tree, like you'll actually start getting infected, but the medicine that heals you actually comes from that same tree. And I thought, like, what a beautiful, metaphor that Creator gave us, on earth in these plants, that the source of the wound is also the source of the healing. So how do you go back to that? How do you connect back to that original wounding or those woundings so that you can get your healing, so that you can find your healing? And that it can be scary. That's why I'm going to talk about being braver and letting go of fear. Because healing is hard, right? It's hard to do those things. I also don't like going to the doctor or exercising or eating vegetables. It's hard to do those things. It's hard to heal. It's hard to go back and remember and feel. And so how do we move past that? How do we allow ourselves to be braver? And for me, a lot of it ties to just thinking about, my grandmother. My grandmother is a survivor of boarding school. She was taken from her reservation when she was just 6 or 7 years old, and she was put in Stewart Indian School. And as we all know, horrible things have happened to Indigenous people, to our people in boarding school. But my grandma actually never talked about those traumatic things. In fact, her favorite story from boarding school was to tell me how she won this talent show competition singing Blue Moon. And she used to love to tell that story. And her eyes would light up and she would smile as she would tell me about just the power of her voice in singing. And so I think about my grandma, that's my maternal grandma. And I also think about my paternal grandmother. She had multiple sclerosis. And when I was in fifth grade, it was so advanced, she couldn't even walk. She couldn't even speak. There was always the fear and worry from the doctors that she would swallow her own tongue. And so for me, I've always grown up shy, even though I do this for a living. I travel around and I speak places. But I try to overcome that fear because I think each of us has a voice and each of us has a story. And that voice and story is not only worth telling, but deserving of being told. But I think about my grandmas, because my paternal grandma, she couldn't even use her voice. She couldn't even speak. And my other grandma, like, she drawed on that experience to like help her get through. Like, she chose to see the bright side of things, which I learned is another response to trauma. It's something I've inherited. I always try to find the bright side, the silver lining. Like, I'm always trying to have this positive outlook. And I realized that that survival technique came from my grandma. And I remember talking to my grandma before she passed away, and I said, I want to write a book about your life. Like, can my next book be about you? And she said, why would you want to write about me? Like, you should write about your grandpa. Like, he was a rancher, he went to school, he was educated. Again, like that colonial capitalist view of like, you have to have done all of these things to be worthy of celebration. And I told her, I said, Grandma, but because of you, we are all still here, because you survived, because you are brave. You know, me, this little girl from a reservation who gets scared to ride the city bus unless somebody like physically shows me how to do it first, even though I have my phone and I could Google map my way out of there. Like, I'm afraid to do that. But my grandma, she was taken from her home and then from boarding school, placed in a city working for white people whose kids she had to take care of and laundry she had to do. And she was brave. And I thought, if my ancestors can be brave like that, I want to be brave like that too. And so the thing about fear can prevent us from doing so many things in our lives. Fear from believing that we are worthy to take care of ourselves, fear from getting out of situations that might be toxic, fear from maybe wanting to go get therapy, fear from wanting to heal because it might hurt too much, this fear of the unknown. So when I first learned about breaking down fear, I had just given my first like big talk. It was a TED Talk, and I did really good. I got a standing ovation and everything, but because of my own like trauma, which leaves me with like anxiety and like fear and like unworthy feelings of self-doubt and not worthiness, afterwards when people are coming to talk to me, when I should have been in taking it in and enjoying like my moment in the sun, I was just thinking about all the things I did wrong, all the mistakes I made. And this one lady, she was telling me, you better get ready. You're going to get booked to like speak all of these different places. And I just had this huge fear. And she said, well, you know what fear stands for, right? She said, false expectation about realities. And I was like, I'd never heard of that before, like reframing fear. But I also thought that the way she walked in the world as a white woman was very different from how I walked in the world as an Indigenous and Black woman. And I thought about, you know, the epidemic of murdered and missing Indigenous women and how sometimes when I travel, I am afraid. Like, what if I do go missing? What if something happens to me? I've had friends who know I'm visiting a certain community tell me, like, be careful, they traffic people from that casino or for that place. And just the fear I have of being too vocal, being too much, like trying to fit in this, like I used to work at a predominantly white institution, like how to make myself fit in, not be too loud, not be too much. And thinking about where that comes from. You know, my grandmother, our relatives taken to boarding school, like don't speak your language, don't be yourself, like don't be too Indian. And so then I thought, well, I'm going to reframe the way I think about fear. And then I came up with this: fiercely embrace ancestral resilience. And so anytime I feel afraid, I try to think of fear like this. Like in the same way that Amber was talking about pain, like, yes, you can turn your pain into power. When you reframe fear, you acknowledge it, that it's there. One thing my therapist told me that I like to pass on because I think it's so helpful is when you think all of those different thoughts, just think of them like balloons. So instead of just pushing them all in this closet, like I'm not good enough, I'm scared, this is going to happen, I'm going to fail. Like if you keep putting it in a room, it's going to explode. And then next thing, you're crying in an airport because you missed your flight. No, that was me. And then you're telling the gate agent, like, it's not really the flight I'm crying about. It is all these other things. I'm not crying about that. But so you have to think of them like these balloons you're holding on to. Like, okay, I see that thought. Like, it's telling me I'm not good enough right now. I acknowledge you, I'm going to let it go. I see this thought telling me that I'm not worthy of this opportunity. I'm going to let it go. And something about visualizing it like that, seeing it and letting it go, is one of the ways I feel like I'm able to embrace that fear and flip it into this and start thinking about all the things our ancestors have overcome for us to be here. They sacrificed their lives. They sacrificed so many different things, and they were so brave. And to think about being brave as a way of expression. One time I got in this car accident years before, and then years later, I was doing self-care. I was going to go get a massage. And the massage therapist was like, were you in a car accident? I was like, 4 years ago. And he said, well, the trauma came into you, but it never went out. And I was just like, this massage therapist is dropping some life knowledge right now. And I started thinking about all the other traumas and things that I had let into me, but I never let out. And so that outlet can be anything. That form of expression can be cooking. It can be running. It can be making music. I like writing poetry. I like writing songs. It can be going to ceremony. It can be having your own ceremony of just meeting with your friends and cooking and eating together, playing board games, whatever it is that makes your heart happy. And once I started being braver like that, I feel like I started hearing that voice of insecurity, that voice of doubt even more. And I started getting these little blessings along the way. Like if I was listening to my spirit more, I started hearing more. And I was at this conference in Toronto, and this lady was talking about her experience getting sober. And she said that every time that she would get really drunk, she would feel more and more alone. Like when she would black out, she would feel so lonely. And she realized because her ancestors weren't with her then, like there was that distance from drinking, or they would look away from her. And I just thought wow, I never thought about it like that. And then another friend and I were talking about, sobriety. And this was before I had decided to get sober. And then I went to bed thinking about all the times something bad had happened to me, or I got into some kind of situation and it was all tied to drinking. And I just woke up that day thinking, I'm not going to drink anymore. And as soon as I decided I wasn't going to drink anymore, I could hear this voice in my head, well, what about that one native-owned brewery? Or you don't get crazy anymore. You just have a glass of wine here and there. And I was just wow, I could hear that spirit of alcohol talking to me. And I never heard it before like that. As soon as I closed that door, it was banging on the other side, let me in. My therapist would call that the addict voice and said I was just white knuckling it. But me as an Indigenous person, I knew alcohol had a spirit. They call them spirits for a reason. And once I decided to stop drinking, that's when I found the guitar. And I turned, because I know I do have that addictive behavior, those tendencies. So I turned that into playing guitar. Every day I would learn new chords. I would do it until my fingers got calloused. And anytime I wanted to drink, I would just play my guitar. And I started writing. And the more I did that, the braver I became, and I was able to reflect back and just see all the things that had happened to me. And that's why I love writing so much. I really advocate for writing as a form of self-care, because so many things will happen to you in your life, and you might have some people in your life try to tell you who you are or what that says about you. But when you write or do something creative like that and you reflect, you get to decide the meaning of the things that have happened to you. You get to decide if you want to carry that forward in your life or if you want to let it go. So I always encourage people to find ways of expressing yourself. Again, it doesn't have to be artistically. It could just be going for a run or exercising, but also giving yourself time to reflect on those things too. So I'm just going to end with a story that comes from my mother's homeland. And this is the Pyramid Lake Paiute Reservation in Nixon, Nevada. And so I'm going to tell the Cliff's Notes version of this story as told to me by my uncle, Ralph Burns. If you want to hear the longer version, it's on YouTube, and he also says it in the Paiute language. But essentially, the original man and the original woman had 4 children. And when they were little, they got along. But as they got older, they started arguing and bickering, and they said, if you guys keep fighting, I'm going to separate you. And sure enough, as we humans do, they kept arguing and bickering and not getting along. And so they said, okay, I'm going to send 2 of you to the north and 2 of you to the south. When you get to where you're going, make sure you light your fire so that we know you're okay. And days pass, days pass, days pass. They see a fire lit in one direction, but not the other. And the mother was so saddened by not knowing if her kids were okay or not that she cried enough tears to make this saltwater lake in the middle of the desert, and her sadness turned her to stone. And I used to relate so much to that stone mother growing up because I'd seen a lot of loss in my community. I felt so desensitized. Like I too was made of stone. I couldn't cry at a funeral. I couldn't cry when you were supposed to cry. I used to project a lot of my anger onto the stone mother. Like, is that what I've inherited as an Indigenous person, is not being able to feel, just making myself so numb because it was easier not to feel? And most of us grow up learning how to swim in this lake. And I remember going back, I think I had just gotten out of like a really bad breakup or something, and I was swimming in the lake and I was thinking, wow, she really gave us the best gift a mother or a relative could give somebody. She sacrificed herself to give us this tool of healing. Because if you think about it, I'm literally swimming in tears right now. And isn't that kind of a metaphor for life? Like eventually we will all swim in some kind of sorrow or sadness. But how do you get to the point where you don't drown in it? Where you don't be so consumed by your grief that you want to end your time here on this earth, or you want to detach yourself from all the people who you connect with. And I thought, wow, like she gave us this tool because you can learn how to swim through your sadness so you don't drown. And if you're so sad, you're so tired, you're so depressed, you can't swim, then you can tread water. You can figure out your next move while you catch your breath. And if you are so ultimately destroyed by something that you can't even tread water, then you can float on your back. And you can catch your breath there until you decide what move you're going to make next. And I was just in such awe and such gratitude that, wow, she gave us this gift of healing. And I'm going to think about my own healing like that. Like, what's going to help me swim? What do I want to swim to? What's going to keep me treading water? And what is it that's going to help me catch my breath while I float on my back? And then I also thought about the story in another way. Because for me as an Indigenous person, it's hard to try to balance, being proud of the things I've done, to want to be a role model and encourage other people, but also not be too egotistical and stay humble and grounded. Being connected to my community helps a lot with that. Like when I go home, I'm just my mother's daughter or my sister's little sister, and most people know me by my nickname and not my actual name, so that humbles me. But I also think about this story. They wanted their kids to light their fire while they were on earth so that they knew they were okay. And I think that our ancestors, and we all have them, no matter our race or ethnicity, like we all have beloved ones that have passed on, and I think are hoping for the best for us. But we all have ancestors, and I think they want to know that we're okay. And I think that means each of us is meant to light our fire while we're here on this earth. And lighting your fire could mean being a good mother, being a good brother, being a good uncle, being a good teacher, being a good writer, being whatever it is that you feel like is your heart's work. Whatever doesn't fill that creator-shaped hole, because I don't think there's a way to fill it, but what helps you return to that creator-shaped hole, that God-shaped hole, so you can return to the source of the wound to get that healing. And that is your heart work. And it's hard work, but I think we can all do it. And I think telling the storying, I think is an important part of that. Because like I said, the longest distance, they said, is that 18 inches between the head and the heart. But I heard that the shortest distance between two people is a story. If you spend some time just talking with each other and communicating and hearing a story, you learn so much about a person just from a story. So I hope hearing a little bit about my journey in self-healing has helped you in some way on your journey and in your self-healing journey. But just remember to let go of fear, the fear as you know it, and start thinking of it as spiritually embracing ancestral resilience. Find some ways to express whatever your spirit has to say, because we get this one gift, this one opportunity on earth to show who we are. And how sad to not show who you are to your family, to your loved ones. So express yourself and then reflect, because it's a never-ending cycle, right? We have to go through the tough times to get the lesson, to get the blessing, and it keeps going. And healing is like that too. It's not a final destination we end up at. It's not some goalpost. It's a process, and it's always ongoing. And I heard even that, you can be the most successful person, but you can't outrun your trauma. You can't outrun your hurt. And so we all have to do that heart work of healing. Thank you.
to all the presenters today. Melody, Redmila, Amber, Tanaya. Thanks for those words. Very important. We spent some time reflecting on these, this particular presentation, and we knew it would come across strong, because it's timely, it's necessary, it's got a good intent, a good purpose. So again, thank you all for coming out, spending time with us today, having an interest in self-care and indigenous cultures. Thank you.